Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and it's such a privilege every week to talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of companies ranging from Netflix to Activision Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, and many more, and organizations like YPO, EO. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And this week, I've got such a privilege to talk to Jason Spievak. He's the co-founder, managing partner of Entrada Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital firm on California's Central Coast. And we connected through the UC Santa Barbara community. We're both alumni of that esteemed institution. And Jason and Entrada focus on disruptive innovations, which has been quite the topic lately in recent months. Disruptive innovations that have the potential to reshape markets. He's also a longtime investor, board member, and executive with Apeel Sciences. Really interesting company, which we'll get into talking about, which is really reinventing the multitrillion-dollar global fresh produce market, and really important topic. Prior to that, he was CEO and co-founder of Invoca, a leading provider of marketing automation technology for inbound phone calls. And they were backed by some really big names in the venture capital community like Accel Partners, Upfront Ventures, Salesforce as well. You've heard of a couple of those. And prior to founding Invoca, he was CFO at CallWave, where he led the company's successful IPO in 2004 and has had an esteemed experience throughout Silicon Valley and various different venture capital firms. He also teaches a startup class in UCSB's technology management program. And Jason, such a pleasure to have you here today. We had a chance to chat previously, but we're recording this in April of 2021. It's such a weird time to be talking because we have had such a strange year, and yet business is going through the roof. What are you seeing right now that's hot in the market? Let's just start there, and then we'll go backwards. But what are you seeing right now in terms of the venture capital world? It seems like there's just almost an endless supply of capital, like there has been at other times in our history. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, and John, thank you for having me. So there are some interesting trends evolving in the venture capital space, and not even the early stage venture. We're seeing it in private equity, later stage, a lot of sovereign wealth moving into the markets now. I would say that despite all of the disruption and challenges of COVID over the past year, I think that capital is as cheap as I've ever seen it in my career right now. And you mentioned, hey, there's lots of money everywhere. The old joke was that, if you wanted to raise money in Silicon Valley, you go shake a tree and 100 VCs fall out. And if you don't see one you like, right, go shake another tree. And so I have long thought and have encouraged entrepreneurs to have this perspective that the scarce commodity in that entrepreneur-investor relationship is not the capital, right? There's lots of green money out there. Having been on both sides now, the sort of the FOMO on the investor side of, gee, I'm going to miss a killer deal, a killer investment opportunity, far exceeds that fear of an entrepreneur thinking I may not be able to raise enough money, enough operating capital. The scarce commodity there is not the money, right? There's trillions of dollars sitting out there making 1%, looking for opportunities to beat inflation. And without those smart, motivated, driven, high integrity, hardworking, passionate entrepreneurs, that money sits there making 1%, right? So the scarce commodity in there is not the capital. It's not the venture investment. It's that next Elon Musk. It's that next Mark Zuckerberg, right? And so we look to invest in ideally visionary founders working on truly disruptive opportunities in large markets. That sounds amazing. It's incredibly hard to find. We've been fortunate to work closely with a few of those in our career so far. But I would agree with you. Money is the cheapest it's ever been. And when that barrier, when that hurdle comes down, it creates the risk of lower quality companies getting funded at higher valuations. Right? And I think we are seeing some of that.
And I want to get around to asking you about your involvement in the university and how that has helped you with being in touch with the startup community. But one interesting fact about your fund is that you put a geographic limitation on it, right? So talk a little bit about what that has done, how that's had an impact on you, and why you decided to make a geographic limitation.
That's a great question. And it is a flexible criterion for us when it serves its purpose. A few folks will ask me here and there, good friends of mine, business school buddies and all that, how'd you become a VC, right, after being an operator for so long? And the short answer that probably no one likes to hear is we just decided to do it. And where that came from was there's a group of us here in the Santa Barbara or sort of greater Central Coast community here that are pretty active early stage investors, right? Angel investors. And we'll pool our money together and strengthen numbers, and we'll find great deals to do. And we're then able to leverage the relationships we have with later stage venture capital funds, right? A, B, and C stage VC funds that we have relationships with to help shepherd those companies through future rounds of capital. So we're sitting around going, hey, you put X 100,000 a year into startup investments, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you. Why don't we each put like 5 years worth of money in a bucket, put a name on it, and call it a venture fund, and establish that first stop on the Central Coast for early stage capital, because there really is no institutionalized early stage technology venture capital here on the greater California Central Coast. So that grew from a little idea of just a few million of our own money to inviting friends in, and that scaled to what'll likely end up being 40 to 50 million in sort of total assets under management for Entrada Ventures 1. And with that, we've been able to essentially put the shingle out and become that first stop for entrepreneurs here in the 805 looking for capital. Now, we do invest outside the region. We've made a couple of extremely compelling investments, one in Berkeley, one based out of Denver, one in LA, that come to mind off the top of my head. But for the most part, I'd say more than half of our investment has been here in the 805.
It's funny, when you and I went to UCSB, it had a bit of a party school reputation. And now we're sitting at, it's a university, it still has a bit of a party school reputation, but also has an amazing engineering program, also has a lot of Nobel laureates who are teaching in the program. But I imagine when you started this, doing something for the first time in any category is hard. Were there people that said you're crazy to launch a venture capital fund focused on the 805?
I think the biggest question for folks is there enough here to do, right? And what a lot of people don't realize that aren't as familiar with the greater Santa Barbara Central Coast area is the depth of technology companies that are here. I mean, the household names that are actually born and raised here. So as we were putting together our presentation materials for Entrada to begin to formalize that as a fund and communicate with folks, what we found is just software, just Santa Barbara in the past 20 years, over $20 billion in realized shareholder exit value, just here in Santa Barbara.
Wow.
So a lot of people don't realize companies like Citrix and Appfolio and RightScale and Trade Desk and Logic Monitor and Sonos and Inogen and on are all based here, right? MindBody software as well. Just the list goes on. And so it's a great place for entrepreneurs to come once they've had some success and they want to live their lives here, but they're not done building companies. So there's actually a tremendous depth of early stage technology investment opportunity here, not just with that legacy of entrepreneurs, but so much of what's happening here on the Central Coast really has its roots at UCSB, that party school that we went to. As you mentioned now, I think I probably need to get fact checked on this, but I think there are more Nobel Prize winners at UCSB in the last 10 years, 4 of them, than at Harvard or Stanford.
I've heard something like that. Yeah. Let's talk also about the constraints, right? Because Santa Barbara is not a huge town, 100,000 people or so. It's not close to Los Angeles or San Francisco. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from LA. It's a plane flight away from San Francisco. It's not next to Silicon Valley. It's expensive, so maybe hard to get labor there. Talk about how that influences companies in the startup ecosystem.
Sure. All those things are true. And Santa Barbara's come a very long way from when I graduated back in the prior millennium. And Santa Barbara was where the elderly went to go visit their parents, right? There was a lot going on here other than the defense sector work and some early materials work out of UCSB. And what has evolved is a very rich framework of technology depth and capital that exists here. The challenge is being an expensive community. And yeah, the city of Santa Barbara is about 100,000 people. That's sort of what we call the greater Santa Barbara area, ranging from Goleta and UCSB in the north down to kind of Summerlin, Carpinteria in the south. I think that's closer to about 250,000 people, but still very small compared to LA or Silicon Valley. The cost of living is a challenge, right? There's not a whole lot of middle class here. And so there's a challenge in bringing executive leadership here. We've gotten better at that over the years. And I think the challenge was, hey, there's a killer job in Santa Barbara. I'm going to move down there and become the VP of whatever. What's plan B if it doesn't work out? I'm about to move my family down there. So I think folks moving here are a lot more comfortable now that because of the growth in technology companies and capital here over the past 10 years, there's a plan B, a C, a D. You can stay here forever and build a great career. The higher cost of living obviously drives salaries up. And what I like the most, especially with software companies, is there's a lot of technology talent coming out of UCSB and rolling off successful outcomes at companies like Procore and Logic Monitor and elsewhere. The turnover here is much, much lower than we deal with in Silicon Valley. So
because there's less competition, I guess, or because people want to stick around?
There's a greater sense of stability, I think, of loyalty. A lot of working relationships are also based on friendships and personal relationships around here. We've started companies just because I wanted to go do something with him or her and go build something. So it is
actually one of your, which was it? I think, was it Invoca that started that way?
We did. It was.
Tell us that story. That was a great story.
So we started Invoca. It began with sitting at a coffee shop at Starbucks on the corner of State and Coda down here with Rob Duva, who is my co-founder at Invoca, along with Colin Kelly, our CTO. And Colin was CTO at CallWave before that with us, and Rob was head of customer acquisition. And just two of the smartest, nicest guys I know, just creative and thoughtful and fun to be around. And Rob was kicking ideas around, and we kind of came up with one that was too good not to do at the time, which is essentially extending the concept of performance marketing, right? Click tracking, essentially, to being able to track inbound phone calls to businesses back to their source and feed that data into your SEM, your retargeting, all that stuff. And that began with an idea that was just too good to do, sitting around at Starbucks. Then we pulled Colin in and kind of talked him into joining us. And it was very much three friends taking a Three Musketeers approach, regardless of what our roles and contributions were. Everything was split down the middle three ways. And that structure actually sustained us to growing what is now a company that is, I think we've got about 250 employees here. The company's got sites on 100 million ARR in the not too distant future. And it was really based on going in as friends and leveraging each other's experiences and skill sets and sort of having that social experiment. Fortunately, it worked out.
So you were co-founder and CEO for 8 years. At what point did you decide it was time to step back from that? And was there anything that inspired that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was actually, for me at the time, not to go too YPO on you, but it was a very transformative and freeing experience for me. I was in my 40s at that point in time and feeling the weight of the world as CEO, that since we're the ones who started this and had the original vision, then the pressure's on me to continue to evolve and become that right leader with the right sets of interests and skills for each step of the company's growth. And do you remember where you were or where the company was at that point in terms of size, employees, revenue, anything? Yeah. I've actually had that experience a couple of times now in my career where we crested about 100 employees, and I could no longer with 100% confidence see someone walking down the hall and know who they were, what their name was, right? What's their family situation, what they do, right? When it got to the point where we had people on board that I hadn't even interviewed and they were, contributing members of the team, typically around 100, 125 employees is where I start to feel like there's probably somebody better suited. We're over the viability hurdle, which is what I really enjoy, going from kind of 0 to 1, bringing a concept into existence, wrapping the right resources around it, and beginning to create jobs and outcomes for people that didn't exist there before. Once we get to the hey, it's time to turn this, 2-lane highway into a 10-lane superhighway, there's other people who really enjoy that more than I do and are better at it. And I was fortunate to have assembled a board of directors at that time at Invoca, and I'd love to drop some names here, but some really high quality people that were able to sit down with me and say, hey, it's time to make some decisions around how we scale this. And do you want to be the person that takes this to the next level? If so, you're going to need to start to engage differently than you have on these issues. And if not, let's go find that right person for the next stage of the journey. And I had my...
Did you initiate that or did they initiate that? Or was it both ways?
It's a really good question because we're in a lot of interaction, right? We have a lot of dynamic interaction all the time. I mean, the board members are my friends and they're handpicked to be there and do exactly this. So it was iterative. By the time we sat down, it was actually the morning after an Upfront Ventures conference in LA and Hollywood. I'm sitting down with Mark and Kobe and John, and I think Brett was there as well. And we said, okay, it's time to plan phase B, right? And so I think it was as close to mutual as could be. And it was also a real wake-up call for me that I had reached the point where my time and energy were better spent on helping earlier stage things come into existence. And that was freeing for me when I realized I did not have to continue to be the best at everything at every step of the way. There are very few Gates and Zuckerbergs out there that can take a company from concept to global scale like that. I frankly, I think I'm having the pleasure of watching one of them now at Apeel in James Rogers, and I'm super excited about that.
Okay, pause on that because I want to get into that story and want to talk about that. But it is such a phenomenal thing to think, to not appreciate how absurd it is for Elon Musk, for a Zuckerberg to take a company from zero in revenue, zero employees to $1,000, $100,000, $100 million, $100 billion, whatever it is. It's absolutely insane. And so for you, when you reach this point, it's interesting that you say that it felt like a relief to be okay with the fact that you don't have to be the one to take it beyond to the next stage. And for someone listening to this who's running a company that they're scaling up, that's growing, what are some factors or indicators or red flags, however you want to call it, that they should be on the queue for to figure out if they're maybe at a stage where they should step aside and maybe their lane is somewhere else?
That's a really good question. And I've thought about that quite a bit. I tried to actually capture some of my thoughts in writing as we were bringing new leadership into Invoca. The short version of that is I think you really put yourself at risk of these blind spots if you don't surround yourself with peers and partners and board members and effective leaders that can be a sounding board for you. When we invest in companies, as an example, and I come across one, which we do, that has no board, just has an advisory board of cronies, right? That to me is a yellow flag because there's not the infrastructure there to help someone understand when they're not making the optimal choice for all their stakeholders. And you need relatively low ego if you can do it. And you need folks that can push back on you and give you that feedback. And if you look at folks who build as a solo entrepreneur, they're slow to build leadership teams. They're slow to bring in true senior leadership. They talk about control, right? Those are the things to be mindful of where that person has a high likelihood of getting themselves into an echo chamber that could slow the company's growth. So I think it's really important early on to embrace others as partners in your process and trust, even if they do things 95% as well as you might do a particular thing, right? It's really important to have breadth of leadership, have sounding boards, have folks to share ideas with and iterate with. And that's one of the biggest challenges we see in very early stage teams. It's typically a founder that if they get capital, they're going to start to bring people on board. But without a track record of having embraced partners before, that's a real point of risk in early stage investing until you see them see it through.
All right, let's talk about Apeel. What I love about the origin story about the founding of Apeel Sciences is that it involves a podcast. So tell us the story about James was driving at one point and he had a realization, had an epiphany moment. So tell us the story.
Sure. And with the clear understanding, this is James' stories. James, Jenny, Lou. This is their story and not mine. Right. I came along a year plus later after some of the magic had begun to happen. But James Rogers was a PhD student at UCSB, working on his PhD in material science, which #1 material science university in the world now, as measured by academic citation. So he's in good company there, and was working on developing photovoltaic paint. Basically, paint a surface, plug electrodes into it, power your phone. Right? He spent years working on those devices, trying to figure out how they work. He was driving through the Central Valley because he was up in the Bay Area using university resources there as part of his research, and was listening to a podcast on world hunger while driving through the Central Valley, looking around at this lush green environment around him, thinking, how is it that half the world is starving? We have these magical seeds. We throw them in the ground. You put some water on them. They grow food, right? By the way, they self-propagate every year. So how is it that half the world's starving? So while you and I were working on our fantasy football teams, James, in his spare time while getting his PhD, began to research the causes of world hunger and food spoilage. And it resonated with him because the leading causes of produce spoilage are mass loss and oxidation, right? Water loss, H2O getting out and O2 getting in to that apple, that strawberry, that mango. And so James' background, undergrad at Carnegie Mellon University, right? What do you study in materials at Carnegie Mellon? You study steel, right? Andrew Carnegie. And the way that metallurgists have figured out how to prevent steel from rusting was to incorporate a certain number of sacrificial atoms in there, whether it's nickel or molybdenum or chromium or whatever, that the oxygen liked better, and it would diffuse to the surface, form this oxide barrier around that block of steel, creating stainless steel, and it lasts for hundreds of years instead of oxidizing and flaking away. So James began to think about whether there was a way to create stainless food and find molecules that existed in our food stream already that could be applied on the outside of fruits and vegetables and slow the rate at which they desiccated, the rate at which they ripened and rotted. And to the benefit of the planet, that has happened. And now the company's moving into global deployment, which is a really exciting stage to see this leadership team grow through.
This is also a scary area because people are consuming this material, right? So did it take a lot longer to develop because of that?
It did. And actually, you speak to a really important point there where, first off, and I wish I had an avocado in my hand. It's hard for me to actually talk about it without. It's just food, right? We're using food to preserve food, which means in the inner layers of the skins of fruits and vegetables, there are these molecules, right? Fatty acids, glycerolipids. They're in every bite of food that you take. And it's all FDA approved because we've been eating it for 10,000 years. All we're really doing is extracting a target set of molecules from the inner layers of the fruit of the skin, mixing them together and putting it on the outside. And so all we're doing is adding a little bit more peel is basically the best way to think about it. But that said, right, there's a lot of concern out there, founded or otherwise, around genetically modified foods and frankenfoods and all that stuff. So in addition to having to create world-changing chemistry and develop infrastructure to apply this at scale globally in an almost limitless set of environmental conditions and packing houses, James and the team also had to be very smart and looking years ahead at how to create a brand around this that would lead moms to want to feed this to their kids.
Right. Because you got and selling process. A lot of other companies on the idea that there's not going to be a massive, horrible recall.
Yes. And there's been a whole lot of sort of business school 101 lessons that we've all learned in this process. And it's just been stunning, the depth and breadth of the skills and insight needed to bring a multi-billion-dollar company like Apeel into existence. And it's just been, it's stunning to have a front row seat to what this team has been able to do here for the past 8 or 9 years now.
Now let's focus on Jason. When you first met Jason, what was it about him that stood out?
Or James.
Sorry, James. Yeah. Sorry, James. Yeah.
So I'm happy to talk about James instead of me, by the way, because he's a hell of a lot more interesting. So when I first met James, it was actually at UCSB, and he had just won our new venture competition there. So yet another multi-billion-dollar company in the making coming out of your alma mater. And he had just won the business school competition. He had used that money to incorporate the company, move himself out of his apartment in Isla Vista and actually into a garage where he could set up a real lab bench. And I met James. He was beginning to look at capital at that point in time. And what struck me about James, and I've had the once in a lifetime pleasure, frankly, of being able to travel the world with him and work on some of the early stuff with him. What struck me was, here's this brilliant scientist, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And James, if you're listening, cover your ears, man. One of the very smartest people I've ever met, and had, in addition to that, a set of communication skills that was incredibly disarming and engaging. And one of the things I noticed right out of the gate was, here's this brilliant PhD scientist. He's got patents and stuff I can't even pronounce. And yet, when he explains to you what he's doing, what he's thinking about, what he's working on, he never uses a single acronym. And if he does, he'll stop and go, shoot, let me explain what that is. And he'll give it to you in plain English. So he is a 1 in a billion combination of world-changing vision, deep thinking, curious scientist, and highly effective communication and people skills. So it's hopefully you have the chance to meet him. Maybe I should connect you with him. You do
I'd love to feature him on the show. I mean, it sounds like doing some really interesting work.
So,
what was it like for you? You know, you stepped down from co-founder and CEO of Invoca, which is doing phenomenally well. And then you step into another startup. I don't know how big Apeel was at that time. And you're not the leader anymore. You're not the founder. You're stepping into another company. What was that experience like for you?
So that's a great question, because that was awesome. And it has really freed me up to spend the rest of my career and life doing what I enjoy doing. And so actually, I'm in a group called YPO. We talked a little bit about that. You know, YPO and EO. And
yeah, some of my best guests have been YPOers. Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually have a forum tomorrow with my buddies down in Malibu. So, and I'm still in forum with a lot of the guys I was with at that time when I stepped out at Invoca. And there was a lot of pushback. They're like, you're not being honest with yourself about the fact that you don't care about being CEO next, and you really need to deal with this. And I think I'm okay with this, because it's given me the green light to just say, I like doing this part. This is what I enjoy. This is how I like helping people. And I don't need to feel responsibility for these other parts. So stepping in with James, I came in initially as an investor, then as a board member. And because I didn't have a lot occupying my time at the time, I was finding myself at Apeel down in the first office, right down off Milpas, which we lovingly called the meth lab. And if you saw it, you'd understand why. We were probably 20-something people, I want to say back then, maybe 25-ish, when I started spending the time with James and the crew. And I was down there for lunch several days a week, just trying to learn and absorb. And
he was cool with that, right? It wasn't like the board member breathing down his neck.
He's smart to take advantage of any resources he can find. James said something to me once, which becomes sort of one of those life principles, which is everybody knows something you don't. Everybody has something you can learn from them if you take the time. And so at the time, where he really needed the help was planning out how to capitalize the business. And that's an area where I had a fair amount of experience. And so we just started to work through that and pricing models. And then from there, he asked if I would come into a role on an interim basis to help essentially begin to transition this trillion-dollar vision into a stream of cash flows. And James had a very good idea of where he wanted to go, but he was smart to take other input as well. And so I agreed to come in for what I thought would be a year. And I made up a title, Chief Commercial Officer, which would not impede, at least I thought, the career paths of the folks that are already working hard and scaling on that leadership team. And
it's not a title you hear often. I don't think I've ever seen it before.
I kind of made it up and then learned later that it's actually more common in the UK.
Okay.
But that's fine. And it was temporary for me. It was really freeing to not give a crap what my title was, who reported to me, what my LinkedIn said. I mean, to be really blunt, I think I'd made enough money by that point that if I never made another nickel, I'd be okay. My family would be okay. And that was not the driving force anymore. I wanted to see how much impact we could create for how many people and how many jobs we can create. Right. And so it was
and also not to diminish what you did with Invoca, but you're moving from, marketing automation technologies into world hunger, which is very mission focused, very, very purposeful. What role do you think that played? The fact moving into that. I mean, imagine that must have had some kind of impact for you. The fact that you were moving to something that was incredibly meaningful.
Yeah. And again, great question. And if I look over here, I can tell you what's on my bookshelf has changed a lot in the last few years. And so I got 3 kids, right? My youngest is home here somewhere. She's about to turn 18. And until Apeel, if you ask my kids, what does daddy do? They go, I don't know, technology, something, software, calls, something, right? But since Apeel, right? You ask my kids, especially when they were younger, right? 10 years ago, what does daddy do? He makes the world's food last longer, right? That's clearly not me. That's James and Jenny and Lou and the Apeel team. But to be a part of that and have such clarity of mission and purpose really helped me focus on what we did next with Entrada, which is I only want to invest my time and our money in things that have truly disruptive potential and are also areas that I want to spend the next 5 to 10 years of my life becoming an expert on, because that's required to help the company succeed as an investor and as a board member. So it really was very transformative for me and also got me over the fear hurdle of being able to invest in hard tech, right? 2 of my partners at Entrada Ventures, Greg and Alex, are PhD scientists and super smart. And that enables us to look at much more complex technology in material science, in chemistry, in biochem, in disruptive computing, in robotics, right? Things that I probably would not have had the confidence to take on my own 10 years ago. But the combination of that experience with Apeel and a couple of other companies and having, again, coming back to the importance of strong partners, has put me in a position for this next stage of my life and career to invest and spend my time on truly interesting stuff and not just more SaaS and ad tech and mobile and the stuff that got me here, right? I don't begrudge it, but I'm ready to do harder stuff.
Right. And let's talk a little bit more about that, about Entrada and this term disruptive technology. It's very popular these days. I follow a lot of what ARK Invest does, and Kathy Wood over there. She's kind of been a big leader, among others, in advocating for disruptive technology. But it's a huge world. There's so many different categories to it. So how did you decide to put barriers around it, to limit yourself?
So that's a really good question. As we look at bringing Entrada Ventures 2 into the world in the coming months, that's a lot of what we're working on now, which is what are those guardrails for our investment focus? And we spent about the last year defining those. And there are certain areas where it's obvious we want to pursue, others where it's less clear. Disruptive has become a buzzword, right? And that's fine. Some of the areas, for example, you can be certain that some flavors of quantum computing are going to disrupt most industries out there, right? Imagine if you can get to the time where, people say that the last few Bitcoins will probably never be mined. They will be, and it will take just a few minutes, a few years from now. So quantum is going to have a tremendous impact on computing and AI and nearly every business that relies on data, from drug discovery and diagnostics to global shipping, logistics, and manufacturing, you name it, right? Look at how these mRNA-based vaccines were able to come to market so quickly. Not quantum, but high-speed computing and AI there. So that's an area that we know is going to have a profound impact. How does it evolve as a business, right? In fact, a lot of Google's quantum computing is happening right here in Santa Barbara, which you may not know about. So they're in the same building as Orion. Alex Fong, my partner's company, was in, which he sold to Juniper there. So the building's lucky, but Google's a lot of their quantum work right here in Santa Barbara. So that's going to have a profound impact, right? When you can do in seconds what today takes computing months or years, right? That's going to happen. What's the interim, right? Where are the businesses now? How are you going to, for the next 5 to 10 years, enable the massively distributed traditional computing architecture on this planet to interact with quantum servers in a way where they can get the benefit of having that speed on their data sets, right? Is there a middleware layer here that enables quantum to come into being, right? Is that the next Oracle? Is that the next Microsoft? There's going to be one, right? So we look at technologies with truly disruptive potential in compute, right? Disruptive compute, as well as in life sciences. When you look at the ability to very rapidly pace the process of drug discovery and diagnostics, a company in our portfolio, LightTech, right, is developing a very rapid, among other diagnostics, a very rapid COVID test that they're going to get down to 2 or 3 minutes here shortly in a disposable cartridge. And that essentially has the effect of uninterrupting our lives and letting everybody get back to it. So being able to measure disruption in very human terms as opposed to dollar terms is really what fires us up.
Very cool. We're running a little short on time here, but I want to circle back to one thing we touched on earlier in the interview, which is your involvement in the university and how being, in academia at the same time kind of helps to keep you plugged into emerging technologies and the community. So talk a little bit about the decision to do that and that role that has played for you in the work that you do and investing and being part of the startup community.
Sure. Yeah. And as we as investors look across this sort of greater California Central Coast entrepreneurship community, most of what we're seeing has its roots at UCSB one way or another. It's either first, second, or third, or fourth generation coming out of UCSB. And so being able to stay close to the university as a source of investment opportunity is critical. And I would think of this sort of our top of the funnel, right? It is early stage, very unproven conceptual stuff. We'll go walk the halls in mechanical engineering or computer science or materials, literally pushing doors open and asking faculty what they're working on, right? And you've got folks in there who are working on doing very hard things, which is where innovation usually comes from. And so being able to sort of keep our fingers on the pulse at UCSB and be the first group of folks, also nearly all gauchos in our fund. We got a Mustang in there somewhere. But that gives us the opportunity to be the first that they think of when thinking about, hey, do I have a business here? Who should I talk to? And so we sponsor the business plan competitions. I teach the entrepreneurship program there, along with Dave Adornetto and just a tremendous team that's scaling entrepreneurship at UCSB in the technology management program and our new venture program there. But we stay very present there. We hold VC office hours at co-working locations here in town, as well as at UCSB and Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, so that folks who are even just at the formative stages, whether it's a graduate student or a faculty member, thinking about, oh my gosh, solving this problem in technology, that's easy. Raising money, that terrifies me, right? So helping them bridge that gap. And we invest a lot of time and energy into being the first people that those folks think of when they want to explore whether they have a business opportunity. And that to me is the fun part, going from that 0 to 1. And that's happening on university campuses every day.
Yeah, it's cool that you have found a way to marry your passion and your interests and vocation all together. Also really cool, living here in the San Francisco Bay Area, I come across so many big VC funds that have been around for a long time, well established. And it's cool to hear about one that is really, building. It's still kind of the early stages. So that's really great. I want to wrap things up. 2 questions. First, I'm a big fan of gratitude. So, if you look around at your peers or others in your industry, however you want to define that. So it could be, it could be other investors, other operators. You've been both an investor and an operator. However you want to define it. Who do you respect? Who do you admire? It could be someone you mentioned already or someone new.
There are several folks. I mean, I'm truly, I often find myself looking around the room going, I am the weakest link here. I better not say anything. And I've been fortunate to have some really good friends in YPO, some great leaders I've met through that. On the capital side, it's kind of a funny shout out. And if he's listening, probably will get a chuckle. With Invoca, our first real institutional investor there was Mark Suster at Upfront Ventures down in Los Angeles. And I will say it was tough love and tough lessons for me in the beginning. And I look back now on the 12+ years that Mark and I have had the chance to work together. And we still talk, at least weekly, one way or another, I would say, and sometimes daily when stuff's going on we need to work on. And we also, as a result of that, we brought Upfront Ventures in as the Series A lead at Apeel Sciences. So I've stayed close with Mark and the partners there. A lot of my toughest and most meaningful lessons I look back on now as an investor come from interactions and guidance I got from Mark Suster over the years. So there are others, and I don't want to just call him out. There's a lot of great folks I've had the chance to learn from. But when you ask that question, that's what immediately triggered for me there. So
that's great. That's great. All right. And then last question, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys. You're receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. And, we always thank you, say thank you to family and friends. But in addition to that, who are the mentors, professors, teachers, investors? Who are the people you would acknowledge in your remarks?
There are several. I would start with my wife. Frankly, we've been together since freshman year in the dorms at UCSB, and she's put up with this craziness and instability and risk all her life with me. And we were together when we were 18, so I don't have to tell her what a badass I used to be. She's absolutely been my partner in all of this, and in times of kind of feast or famine and long cycles of no income and betting it all here and there a few times. She's really been my partner in our most successful startups, which are our 3 kids. I'm so in awe of our kids. I mentioned my son the other day. He's an entrepreneur as well. He just graduated UCLA.
Yeah, he's doing some interesting stuff. Yeah, he's doing some interesting stuff, and a fan of the show. Thank you.
He is. In fact, he was the first one I asked when John connected you and me together. So, but there are other folks out there as well. There are some real luminaries in the capital community and entrepreneurship community up in the Bay Area, where I spent the first half of my career. Some of the partners at Broadview, the investment bank, folks like Javier Rojas and Paul Chrissy and Steve Smith and Greg Rossman, that taught me the basics of business when I was just a complete poser coming out of business school and hoping nobody noticed. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Those relationships and that support I got from the team at Broadview, Rick Dalton, some of the other folks there, Tricia Solanero, that was really formative for me in turning from a kid into a professional. And that was kind of around the time that felt like it started to happen. So I don't know, man, I can go on, but it's, for me, what's been most important is being able to maintain those relationships for 20, 30 years. I look back and I don't think I have a single professional burned bridge out there anywhere, and I work hard at that and try to create great outcomes for other people. And this is, fortunate here at Entrada to do that with a pretty unique structure where we don't take any management fees or comp or anything. We are ourselves among the largest LPs in the fund, and we don't pay ourselves anything. So it's really been a labor of love to scale early stage entrepreneurial capital here on the Central Coast. And I just love the people that we're doing it with. And I love that I'm here in Santa Barbara on a beautiful day and nothing feels like work anymore. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you're doing good stuff, helping to rid the world a little bit of wasted food and help with poverty.
Keep an eye on Apeel. That's going to be pretty big.
Yeah, very cool. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you, Jason?
I think just come to entradaventures.com. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn if you're interested, and share with me why we ought to connect. And I'm happy to. And feel free to reach out if there's any way that we can be of help to you and any of your listeners.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Jason.
Thanks, John. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.